truly honored.
Thank you.
Our second judge for today is Mr. Tanveer Ahmed Mir, who is an eminent criminal defense advocate, senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India, who is practicing for the last 23 years across the country. Sir specializes in white collar and criminal defense. His specialty includes developing overall strategies, conducting cross-examination for mounting the defense for the accused, and handling the trial as well as in appeal in criminal cases filed under the Income Tax Act, the Black Money Act. So further specializes in advising clients in matters related to money laundering under the PMLA 2002 Customs Act and indictments instituted by federal law, investigating agencies like the CBI, ED, SFIO, and GST. Sir has successfully defended the accused in cases like the 2G Spectrum case, the Arushi Talwar, the Hemraj double murders case, Ryan School murder case, Augusta Westland scam case, whole scam, corruption and money laundering indictments, Gurmeet Ram Rahim and his organization Dera Sacha Sauda in the sedition case. So was the defense counsel for corporate lobbyist Deepak Talwar in corruption and money laundering cases. So has also defended Mr. Robert Vadra and his associates in money laundering cases. So is also a counsel for Indrani Peter Mukherjee in the Sheena Bora murder case in Mumbai. So is the defense counsel in the famous Nargis Tunisa Kidzi murder case as well. So recently defended Kuldeep Singh Sengar in the Unnao rape case, and defended Dr. Shiv Sundar Mohan Singh in the Ranbaxy delegate scam as well. Tanveer sir, thank you so much for coming over for the finals. Our third judge for the final is Mr. Pradeep Rai, who is the Vice President of the Supreme Court Bar Association and a Senior Advocate of the Honorable Supreme Court of India. Sir is also the Chairman of ILRF, the Chairman of the India Legal Aid Center, and is also former VC of NADA. Sir is also the Chairman of various subcommittees of the Supreme Court Bar Association, including the E-Committee of the Supreme Court Bar Association. Sir represents the Union of India along with many states, including Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Bihar, and Andhra Pradesh. Sir has represented various top corporate houses, celebrities, film stars, politicians, and chief ministers. Mr. Rai is also the chairman of the India Legal Aid Center and the chairman of India Legal Research Foundation, which I just mentioned. Sir was the former vice chairman of the National Anti-Doping Agency, which is the premier organization under the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports for promoting, coordinating, and monitoring doping control in all the sports in India. Sir also appears on legal awareness programs of all the leading national TV and international TV news channels. Pradeep sir, thank you so much for coming over to educate the competition. We are truly honored.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fourth judge for the competition is for the final is Mr. Vivek Narayan Sharma, who is an advocate on record at the Honorable Supreme Court of India and is also an accredited mediator. Sir is also the senior counsel for the Union of India and the government of Uttar Pradesh. Sir is also the member of the IT Committee Bar Council of Delhi. And Sir also served as the Joint Secretary of the Supreme Court AOR Association from 2018 to 2020. In addition to that, Sir was the pro bono counsel at the Delhi High Court Legal Service Committee. Sir was the additional standing, Sir is the additional standing counsel for New Delhi Municipal Council, NDMC, in the Delhi High Court. Sir is also the standing counsel for the NHAI in National Green Tribunals and a senior panel counsel in the Supreme Court, Delhi High Court, and arbitrations. Sir is also a senior panel counsel for NHPC. Sir is also a senior panel counsel for UPPCL and also a senior panel counsel for Coal India Limited, its subsidiaries in the Supreme Court, CAT, NCDRC, and a nominated counsel in Delhi High Court since August 2009. Serves distinguished clientele comprises of ministers, political parties, private corporations like GMR, ERA, etc. Sir has authored Electionomics, a book published by Thomson Reuters entailing the aspects of elections, its functioning and analysis. Sir is a columnist for various reputed publications and was awarded the Legal Icon Award 2015 by Time India News and was also conferred the Bharat Gaurav Samman 2017 by Today Live News. Sir has delivered a plethora of speeches and lectures. Notable among them are speech at the International Youth Festival at Pretoria, South Africa, on human rights, and the Indian Constitution and National Conference on Economic Offences 2019, organized by the High Court of Judicature at Madras, and TNSGA at Combater, attended by judges from Supreme Court and all the High Courts of India. The committee is indeed truly honored to have you, sir, as the adjudicator for the finals. Thank you, sir. Last but not the least, a final judge for the finals is Ms. Sanchita N, who is a partner at ASV Legal LLP and is an advocate on record at the Supreme Court of India. Ma'am is also a top 100X Lex Falcon awardee. Ma'am has represented in landmark constitutional law cases like the linking of PAN with Aadhaar, triple talaq, 2G spectrum case, affirmative action, rights of minority institutions, land acquisition cases, and various other matters. Ma'am advises various startups, early stage companies, and clients from the entertainment industry. Ma'am is also an ICANN Lead Fellow, which is India's first national leadership program for women with disabilities. Ma'am also takes keen interest in education, and she's an educator with focus on the democratization of learning. And ma'am also is frequently invited by renowned universities to deliver lectures and judge competitions. Ma'am, thank you so much for coming over this Sunday afternoon to adjudicate the finals of the competition.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, your lordships and ladyships, for coming over. I'll now hand over the microphone to my co-secretary, Mr. Arunoday Gupta, if he wants to add on to something.
Yes, Your Lordship, thank you so much for coming. As it said that after the competition is done, both the teams have submitted their arguments. Then, with the leave of Your Lordships, we will move them to a different private room where they can discuss and declare the winner and also the best speaker. I think we can start off with the competition. The courtmasters can take it from here.
Thank you, Arunoday. Good afternoon, Your Lordships. Good afternoon, Your Ladyship, and everyone present in this room. Welcome to the Department of Law, University of Calcutta, Interdepartmental Moot Court Competition 2021 Finale Round. Before the round begins, I will just quickly read out the rules of the competition. The participants, please note that all the participants are hereby informed that each team will get a total of 30 minutes speaking time for this finale round. Both the teams can divide speaking time between their both speakers at their own free will. Petitioner, if opting for rebuttal, will save the time for the rebuttal in the provided 30 minutes only and will not be provided any extra time for rebuttal. Respondents in this moot court competition are not allowed to make any rebuttals. From the commencement of the round till the round is over, all the participants, including researchers, must keep their video feed on and under no circumstances will be allowed to argue if all team members' videos are not visible. In the case of audio, all the participants should keep their microphone off except during their speaking time or if they are directed otherwise. In case of a network connection issue or technical glitch being faced by a participant, he or she will be given a window of 5 minutes only to solve their problem. And if the concerned participant is the speaker and he or she fails to join within the stipulated time period, the other speaker shall take over thereon, and in case both the speakers fail to join, then the researcher can take over only after taking permission from the respective judge. From each team, only the researcher can share the compendium via screen share mode only, subject to the discretion of the judges. The counsel can now begin with their submissions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Lordships and Your Ladyship. Permission to approach the bench.
You have the permission, go ahead.
Much obliged, Your Ladyship. Are Your Lordships and Your Ladyship well versed with the facts of the case?
Yeah, start.
The Honorable Court has jurisdiction in the present matter, which is listed today for final hearing under Articles 32 and 136 of the Constitution of Georgetown. Your Lordships, the counsels for the petitioner will basically deal with two issues here. Firstly, they will challenge the constitutionality of the recently enacted Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act, and secondly, they will challenge the rejection of the bail application of the accused, which was rejected by the Honorable High Court of Queenstown.
Before you
So-
begin, why didn't you exhaust the alternate remedy available to you before the High Court? As far as 32 is concerned, why did you come before us? Why not before the High Court first?
Your Ladyship, as per the facts of the moot problem, we were directed to approach the Supreme Court at first. We are not allowed to approach the High Court for the alternative remedy as per the moot court committee's problem. Our hands were tied in this regard. We were set forward that we have to approach the Supreme Court only.
Okay, if your hands were not tied by the problem, then would you have approached the High Court?
Your Lordship, this is a national anti-conversion law whose constitutionality we were challenging. So we would have preferred approaching the Honorable Supreme Court, but then
It's a state law. It's a state law. Why not go before the state High Court first?
No, it's not Your Ladyship. With all due respect, it is not a state law. It's the national anti-conversion law that we are challenging here. Georgetown is a whole country, and Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act pertains the whole of the country of Georgetown, as per the facts of the moot problem, Your Ladyship.
Right. Go ahead.
Much obliged, Your Ladyship. Firstly, the counsels for the petitioner will show the legislative incompetence of the Central Parliament of Georgetown to make a national anti-conversion law of Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act. Thereafter, they will go on to show how this act violates the Golden Triangle of fundamental rights and other fundamental rights guaranteed to the citizens of the Georgetown. And then they will go to the bail issue. So, firstly, talking about the legislative incompetence of the Central Parliament of Georgetown. Your Lordships and your Ladyships, this act of Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act is in essence basically a national anti-conversion law, and as it is a common knowledge, and it was held in judgments also, which we will cite very soon. It's a well-established law that national anti-conversion laws or any anti-conversion laws, they are basically designed to maintain public order in the state. Now, they are designed to maintain public order in cases where public order is disturbed because of forcible and unlawful conversions. So basically, as it is known to your Lordships, that public order falls under entry 1 of the state list under the 7th schedule. So basically, this national anti-conversion law has been enacted by the Central Parliament of Georgetown by abusing its legislative power, because it is not empowered to make laws which is exclusively within the domain of the state list. This is the state's exclusive domain, not the Central Parliament's exclusive domain, to make a national anti-conversion law. Now, to back this argument, we would cite the landmark case of Reverend Stanislaus versus State of Madhya Pradesh in 1977, where the Supreme Court had said.
Hold on.
Yes.
You are saying that the entry relating to falls under the state. Which entry is it?
Entry 1 of the state list, Your Lordship.
What about the penal, which falls on the concurrent list? Is a concurrent. Have you seen the concurrent?
Yes.
Concurrent list covers criminal and penal laws. Penal laws are covered on the concurrent list.
Your Lordship, answering to this question, according to the doctrine of peace and substance, this law, this Georgetown Freedom of Law, is in essence in its peace and substance our national anti-conversion law, and has made incidental encroachment into the domain of religion and penal laws. So this shows that the Central Parliament does not have the legislative competence to make this national anti-conversion law. And this exact observation was given by the Honorable Supreme Court in the Stanislaus case. The researcher is requested, with the permission of the Honorable Bench, to show the relevant portion of the Stanislaus case, where the Supreme Court had made this observation about national anti-conversion laws being not tenable. The researcher is requested to do so. So as your Lordships can see, that herein the Honorable Supreme Court had held that national anti-conversion laws are not tenable because they clearly fall under the state list and not under the restorative legislative powers or under the concurrent list of the 7th schedule. So the right-wing GDP party, the extreme right-wing GDP party, which is in power in Georgetown, who has enacted this act, has violated due process of law and abused its legislative powers to enact a national draconian anti-conversion law. And moreover, a small matter, a small point, it is brought to the notice that in 2015, the Union Law Ministry itself had commented to the Deccan Chronicle that a national anti-conversion law is not tenable. But still in 2021, they have gone ahead and abusing the legislative power. The GDP, who has recently come into power, has gone ahead and made a national anti-conversion law of Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act. Now, coming back to the...
How does it come under public order, Council? Can you please explain that first?
Your Lordships, as per this judgment of Stanislaus also, it comes under public order because as your Lordship can see that these national anti-conversion laws are basically designed to maintain public order, which gets disturbed from time to time because of communal disharmony that happens from time to time because of forcible conversions. So in this way, in essence, this falls under the domain of public order, your Ladyship. So moving ahead to the violation of fundamental rights. Firstly, the notice is drawn to the landmark case of Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India of 2018, where the Honorable Supreme Court decriminalized same-sex relations, and while doing so, they made a very pertinent observation about how to evaluate law for constitutionality. They had observed here that while evaluating a law for constitutionality, what is not important is the object of the act, but what is important is the effect of the act. And the councils will step by step show that how this impugned Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act, this draconian National Anti-Conversion Act, violates the Golden Triangle of fundamental rights and other fundamental rights guaranteed to the citizens of Georgetown. Firstly, beginning with the violation of rights under Article 14. Your Lordships and your Ladyship, attention is drawn of the Honorable Bench to the definition of conversion under Section 2, Clause C of this Act. Here, definition of the section of conversion in Section 2, Clause C exclusively and expressly leaves out the definition of reconversion from it. It is humbly stated to the Honorable Bench. Yes, your Lordship. It is humbly. Yes.
I think your challenge to the validity is only against Article 25. You not raised 14 and 19.
Yes, we'll come to the point how we are challenging Articles 14, 19, 21. We'll be challenging all these articles. We'll challenge the whole Golden Triangle, your Lordships. So, permission to move on, your Lordship?
Okay, but your brief said only Article 25.
Your Lordship,
if you look at para 8, it says that the validity of the act has been challenged on the ground violating Article 25. So can you raise?
Lordship, yes, your Lordship. In our submission in paragraphs 23 to 25, in page number 14 of the memorial, we have discussed the violations of Article 14. So we are not stating anything which have not been present in our submission, your Lordship. So coming to the definition, coming to the violation of Article 14, Section 2, Clause C exclusively leaves out the ambit of reconversion from this domain. So in effect, what can be the direct consequence and effect of this exclusive leaving out of reconversion from a national anti-conversion law? Your Lordship, it is humbly stated that suppose a person gets converted by marriage or force. Yes, your Lordship. Suppose a person gets converted. Suppose a person gets converted by marriage or undue influence or coercion or alludation, whatever, as per the provisions of this act, such conversion will be declared void. But while reconversion back to the parent religion, if force is applied to the person, if coercion is applied to the person, if undue influence is applied to the person, such action will not be curtailed or protected under this national anti-conversion law. Where is the equality here, your Lordships? And in this respect, a very pertinent observation of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom about leaving out of reconversions from the domain of anti-conversion, from the domain of conversion, from the definition of conversion, anti-conversion law is pertinent to be mentioned. Your
But is
Lordship,
it the issue? I'm sorry, means is it the issue that you're mentioning? Because I think is you are relying on Article 25, which says there is a right to practice religion as per the wish of an individual. And the act which is under challenge, as per that act, the conversion means forceful conversion is declared illegal. So in such a scenario, how do you make a nexus between the Article 25 and the act in challenge? And how do you establish the violation in this circumstance? Because in any case, any forceful conversion is violative of the fundamental right and also the statutory right to which you have challenged. So how do you establish that nexus between these two?
Your Lordships, this is actually a very important question. We would have dealt it later, but we'll deal it now because Honorable Bench has asked. Your Lordship, we have discussed the violation of rights under Article 25 in details in paragraphs 26 to 27 of our memorial. So, to answer the Honorable Bench, Your Lordship, the biggest paradox about this act is that this act is named Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act. It wants to provide freedom of religion under Article 25, but in reality, it violates the fundamental right to religion and conscience and guaranteed under Article 25. How so, Your Lordship? Your Lordship, every religion, in essence, at its basic core, is a deal with divinity. Every religion says that if you do such and such act, we will be blessed. Either we'll be blessed with happiness, or we'll be blessed with wealth, or we'll be blessed with maybe 72 women in paradise.
You would have a very less time. So I'm again very specific in my query. If there is a forceful conversion, only then the punishment is prescribed under the act. And the constitution provision also provides so. So if suppose there is a forceful conversion, only then the penal provisions would be attracted. So if there is no forceful conversion, then in that case, penal provisions are not attracted. So in any case, forceful conversion is something which is violative of the fundamental right also. So then how do you say that this law is violative? Because it is providing freedom of religion to practice.
And just to add one more thing to what, same issue, if you see the first line of the act, the preamble, it says an act to provide freedom of religion. Now, if it is already providing freedom of religion, how can it be violative of freedom of religion? See, even asked.
Exactly. I was coming, extending this point.
My colleague has issued the question and
so
they can
address specific to this point right now, instead of going haywire.
You are on Article 14. So what is the specific? Because it itself says so that it is freedom of religion. How can it be violative of religion?
Your Lordship, suppose the definition of allurement under Section 2 Clause A is relevant in answering this question. So I'm drawing this connection with Section 2 Clause A, which is the definition of allurement under this Act, to answer this question how Article 25 is violated here. Your Lordship, the definition of allurement read with Section 3 of the Act clearly makes the Act prohibit any sort of religious conversion made for any gain. So if a citizen of Georgetown wants to voluntarily convert his religion, he can do so under Article 25, right? But this Act, because of the definition of allurement, because of the phrasing of the words of definition of allurement read with Section 3, if he makes a religious conversion for any gain, whether it be the gain of happiness, of mental peace of mind, or he be doing it for education, or he be doing it for enlightenment.
No, that's too far-reaching. That's too far-reaching. Allurement has to be seen in the tangible form. It can't be so that for my happiness, then it would become violative of 25. But the Act does not provide. So the object of the Act is only to provide freedom to exercise any religion and to convert to a particular religion of choice. So allurement is the tangible aspect of the conversion, that for some reason, if a person is being enticed and then being given some benefits, some tangible benefits, then in that case, the allurement definition would be attracted. So one can be, you can define how do you read the allurement and how it is contrary to the Article 25.
Your Lordship, it may be far-reaching, but it may appear far-reaching before the Honorable Bench. But this definition of allurement will literally give to the state arbitrary policing powers in deciding which religious
Okay,
conversion.
which part of the definition of allurement? Can you refer to the specific part you are talking about?
The researcher is requested to screenshot the definition of allurement with the honorable bench. If the researcher may.
You can read it out till then.
Yes,
Yeah.
Your Lordship, just a few seconds. Your Lordships, in the definition of allurement, allurement means and includes an act of offering of any temptation in the form of any gift or gratification or material benefit, either in cash or kind or employment or education in school, done by any religious body, better lifestyle, divine pleasure, or the promise of it thereof or otherwise.
So you see that the material, anything which is in material, not intangible form, happiness, you mentioned happiness. If you are achieving happiness by way of change of religion, then it is violative and allurement.
Your Lordship,
So
divine
you
pleasure
went
is,
wrong in this.
Your Lordship, with all due respect, Your Lordship, divine pleasure is mentioned here, which is intangible in nature. So if I want some divine pleasure by converting into other religion, it is my fundamental right under Article 25, but this act will not let me do so. Your
So
Lordship,
only to the extent the divine pleasure, which is intangible in form, can be relied upon by you, not otherwise.
And the word otherwise has also been used here, which leaves open to all sorts of intangible definitions of happiness and everything else. Your Lordship, the otherwise can be misused and arbitrarily used by the state, to go against the minorities and curb their religious conversion, especially going on into the minority religion. This is how the Article 25 is violated, Your Lordships. Now,
Mr. Counsel, can you develop your argument in seeking to challenge the wires of this act by making a submission of the mention of marriage in the preamble? What is your take?
Yes, Your Lordship. Yes, Your Lordship.
If under the marriage laws and conventions of a particular religion, the other spouse also has to be of the same religion, then any law seeking to prohibit the conversion by the dint of marriage, would it violate the right of religion of a particular person under Articles 14 read with 25?
Your Lordship, as Your Lordship so rightly mentioned, that the word marriage has been used in the very preamble of this act and also in the later parts of the act. So basically, any religious conversions by marriage will be prohibited by this act, which is a direct assault on the fundamental right to choose partners. So basically, this act brings the shadow of criminality over interfaith marriages, thereby violating Article 21 of the citizens of Georgetown. See, right to choose partners is a well-established fundamental right by the Honorable Supreme Court. Now, this act puts the word marriage on the same pedestal. It puts the word marriage on the same pedestal as coercion and undue influence and coercion and allurement, etc., etc. Is marriage something so heinous to be put in the at the same level with force, coercion that this act has been doing? In a very liberal interpretation or in a strict interpretation, basically this act.
You're missing the point with my colleague is making. The point is what you must develop is that whether marriage, there can be a conversion only by marriage.
Your Lordship, suppose the interfaith marriage happens. Suppose the interfaith marriage happens. And one spouse.
Marriage has nothing to do with conversion. You can continue in marriage and you may not be converted at all.
Exactly. That's a personal choice. That's a personal choice of a person, and this act walks into it. I may convert after marriage, I may not convert after marriage. That is my choice. But this act says, if I don't want to convert, it's okay. But if I want to convert, this will make the conversion void, because this will then say that I have converted for the sake of marriage. It will make my conversion void. It will also make my marriage void. And most importantly, this act gives the right to any of the disgruntled family members who are against the interfaith marriages. It literally gives rights to even the members of the community of the Khas Panchayat who can literally walk in who can literally walk in and decide to interfere
Okay,
into the
just
lives
for the
of the
sake of
interested party.
argument, it says no person shall convert or attempt to convert any other person by marriage. Right?
It's
So are you getting the question I'm trying to ask here? And even Mr. Gupta was trying to ask the same question to you. When you are trying to convert another person by marriage, if you force a person to register their marriage under a certain act, right? Suppose there are two individuals, one is Hindu, one is Muslim, and you're forcibly, asking the person to register under the Hindu Act or the Muslim Act, as in go under the personal law and get married, then what happens?
Your ladyship, that is forcible conversion. Forcible conversion any day is not right. We are not against forcible conversion in any way, your lordship.
Right. Otherwise, you have a right to marry even under secular law.
So-
It's not conversion.
What we are challenging here is that after marriage, I married a interfaith person and I want to change my religion into my spouse's religion.
This act doesn't
Spouse's-
stop that.
This act will stop that. This act will stop that by the arbitrary policing powers. The state will get to decide. The state will basically get to decide whether I am making a bona fide conversion or not. And based on this, basically the state gets an wide arbitrary powers to decide what conversion is right and what conversion is not right. This is what we are challenging. If I do not convert after marriage, we're not challenging that, or forceful conversions either. Your lordships, so we have shown how the golden triangle is violated. Now, moving on to the issue of bail with the honorable court's permission.
Right. I hope you're aware of the time.
Yes, your lordships, we are requesting a little bit of more time to address the issue of bail, if it is if it's okay with the honorable bench.
Just summarize
All
it.
right.
Summarize
You
it.
carry
With
on.
I will
we still
wrap
have
it up
time.
fast. I will wrap it up fast, the issue of bail, if your lordships permit. Your lordships, while rejecting bail applications, usually what the counsels for the state do is they put up some very strong arguments of scope of witness and evidence tampering. Your lordships, as per the facts of the Moat problem, the accused husband was arrested on the very day the FIR was lodged. This shows that the accused person has no power or influence whatsoever to do evidence something as heinous as, something as grave as witness and evidence tampering. And most importantly, your lordship, which is clear from the facts and
on what
circumstances of the
grounds
case,
was your bail application dismissed by High Court?
as per the facts of the Moat problem, it is stated that the High Court of Princeton dismissed the bail application, just stating, it has not stated anything else, by stating that there are no reasonable grounds to believe that the accused is not guilty of the offence he is charged with. The Honorable High Court dismissed. The Honorable High Court dismissed the bail application. The counsels for the petitioner believe there is ample scope for application of judicial mind. That's why we have approached the Honorable Court to challenge the rejection of the bail application before the Honorable High Court. So we are challenging that rejection basically. So regarding witness and evidence tampering, we just said that the accused husband has no power whatsoever. He's a common minority man to do witness and evidence tampering. Your lordships, most importantly, if the accused is released on bail, that effect of granting bail is not to set the accused free. And most importantly, your lordships, the accused is in custody since the day of the arrest for more than 200 plus days. The charge sheet was filed on 30th April, the final charge sheet, and till date, no charges have been framed. Till date, no trial has started, and he is just languishing in jail. And as per this draconian national anti-conversion law, which we seek to scrap, this puts the burden of proving the innocence on the accused. So it is humbly requested that the Honorable Court release the person on bail because he is an under trial prisoner. And it is humbly requested that he be released so that he may better prepare for his fair trial and present and prove his innocence. And from the facts and circumstances of the case, it is also evident that no 41A compliance was done by the investigation officer. This goes against the very basic, well-settled law that 41A compliance is necessary for criminal cases arising out of matrimonial disputes. So on this grounds, it is requested, among other grounds which will be stated by my co-speaker, it is requested that the petitioner and the accused be released on bail under any terms and conditions deemed fit by this honorable bench. if the lordships permit, as
Counsel,
what
you are in, Mr. Counsel, you are in an appeal before the Supreme Court.
yes,
Please
your
tell us what part of the High Court judgment rejecting your bail has agitated you, which on which ground you seek to appeal, because
your
you don't
lordship,
now have individual jurisdiction. You are in an appellate jurisdiction now. Where do you think that the High Court has gone wrong?
your lordship, the High Court, with the counsels for the petitioner and the accused husband, the counsels for the accused believe that the High Court of Princeton did not apply its that failed to apply his judicial mind and evaluate all the conditions and facts and circumstances of the case, like non-compliance of a 200 notice, delay in trial for so long.
No. You just told us that the High Court has returned a finding that there is no reasonable ground to believe that you're not guilty of the offense. Can you build your argument on that?
Your lordship, can you please repeat your question? It's kind of broke off.
The High Court has said that there is nothing in the case by the virtue of which there is a reasonable ground to believe that you are not guilty. Can you build your argument that whether the High Court, under the provisions of the Act, was entitled to return such a finding in first place?
Lordship, the counsels believe that there are indeed reasonable grounds. There are reasonable grounds to believe that the accused husband has not done the offense which he has been charged with, because the accused husband, as per the facts of the case, knew the de facto complainant before 4 months of marriage, and the de facto complainant stated that he did not know the religion of the husband, and the husband has been forcing to coax or coerce her into his husband's religion. But these are basically, as per the facts of the most problem, these are basically way of harassment and extortion from the husband, your lordship. And thus, all these points were probably not evaluated because the High Court just did not give a proper reason. Did not give a proper reason as to why there are no. High Court believes that there are no reasonable grounds. No such reasons were cited. It just simply stated that there are no reasonable grounds to believe. So we have approached the Honorable Supreme Court challenging the rejection, because the consequences of an under trial prisoner staying in custody for so long are grave. And in this regard, a judgment is to be cited, where in the case of Sanjay Chandra versus CBI, the researcher is requested to present the case, where in page 65 of the compendium, annexed 7B, in the Sanjay Chandra versus CBI, which is a reported judgment, where Justice H.L. Jattu says that it makes sense to assume that a man on bail has a better chance to prepare or present his case than one remanded in custody. And if public justice is to be promoted, mechanical detention should be demoted. Your lordships, this draconian national anti-conversion law, as I have stated earlier, puts the burden of proving innocence on the accused, and he is already languishing in jail for so long, for 200 plus days, without any framing of charges, without even the trial being started, and he has no scope of preparing.
That's all right, Mr. Counsel. We know that. Can you tell us whether the statute or the penal offences which have been pressed into service by the prosecution provide for any escalated bail jurisprudence? Does the Act provide for any escalation for conditions of bail? Because the High Court has returned a finding exactly that the High Court reject the bail application, holding that there are no reasonable grounds for believing that he's not guilty. Essence is on the word not guilty. Does the Act or the penal provision provide for any escalated bail jurisprudence? Or is it normal jail jurisprudence under 439 CRPC? Can you tell us whether you are aware about those statutes where there is an escalated bail jurisprudence in comparison to the normal?
Your lordships, the counsel plead ignorance about this escalated bail jurisprudence issue.
All right. You may proceed or finish your argument.
The next counsel now.
Your lordships and your ladyship, just a minor point which is different from the current issue is that my lady co-counsel, my learned lady co-counsel, has a medical condition where she has a lot of non-malignant tumors, because of whose pain she could not perform yesterday in one of the preliminary rounds. but she is very eager to perform before this esteemed stellar bench today. But just in case she fails to make her submission or complete her submission or fails to answer any question, it is humbly requested that the speaker won't be allowed to answer on the behalf of the petitioners as a team. Much
Perfectly.
obliged,
Fair
your,
enough. That's
much
granted.
obliged, your lordships and ladyship. Much obliged. Requesting the speaker to come up and also recite the prayer at the end.
Good afternoon, your lordships and your ladyship. The counsel for the petitioner, Speaker 2, will now like to begin with the submissions, if your lordships so permit.
Please go ahead.
It has time and again been contended by the accused that his wife, Sandra, was aware of his religion and had agreed to convert out of her free will, and that she and her family members were using the draconian new law to harass him and to extract money from him, and that the police did not give any heed to his statements, as has been mentioned in paragraph 5 of the moot problem. The counsel for the petitioner would further like to state that the accused belongs to a minority community, and with the recent incidents of communal disharmony in Georgetown and the dire inaction of the police regarding the accuser's serious allegations against the wife and her family members of extortion and harassment through a string of fabricated charges, it can be deduced that this is a serious case of minority discrimination. The appellant in this
I
case,
think the counsel, the issues is on the legal constitutional validity and on the bail. You have to confine yourself to constitutional validity and the bail issue. So what are you exactly addressing on?
I'm addressing the bail issue, your lordship.
Well, very well. Please go forward. Why would we be willing to grant a bail to you once the High Court has dismissed us? Please tell us. Why should we interfere in the judgment passed by the High Court? And what would be your best argument?
Your lordship, as is evident from the facts of the case, the appellant has been arrested on the very day the FIR was registered, that is on 31st March, and thereafter he was sent to 14 days of police custody, and subsequent to that he was given judicial custody by the magistrate. The investigation has also concluded and the charge sheet has been filed on 30th April 2021, and since then the trial has not yet commenced, even though the matter regarding bail has been brought up before the Supreme Court. Honorable Supreme Court, it would be a travesty of justice if bail is not granted to the accused and further detention orders are passed for the accused. Your lordship, this is the best argument, I believe, in this matter. Shall I proceed with my submissions?
Yeah, you can.
Well,
You have to really point out what exactly are the conditions on which the bail is granted. And the High Court, as my friend said, that there are no reasonable grounds. So what are the reasonable grounds on which you should be granted bail by the Supreme Court? That is what you have to attack. You have to say, look, these are the 5 reasonable grounds because of which the bail should be granted. And that is what we really would like to hear from you.
Your lordship, the accused in this case, as per section 5 of the act, is convicted of the offense, and the maximum punishment as per the offense is 10 years.
Convicted?
Imprisonment for 10 years. Imprisonment
Did you
for
say
10 years.
convicted? Did you say the accused has been convicted?
Your lordship, I beg your pardon for that. I'm really sorry. It is clearly evident from section 5 of the act, the maximum imprisonment that can happen to the accused post-conviction is 10 years. It has been held in several eminent cases that unless exceptional circumstances are brought to the notice of this court, which may defeat proper investigation and trial, the court will not decline bail to a person who is not accused of an offense punishable with death or imprisonment for life. Since the accused is not an influential person, which is evident from the fact that he was arrested on the day the FIR was registered, that was on 31st March, and there are no exceptional cases which can warrant further custody of the accused at a pre-trial stage where investigation has already been completed.
Madam Counsel, can you please tell us, what do you understand by seriousness and gravity of offense in terms to your submissions and the client that you represent?
Lordship, Rana alias Mana is not accused of offenses which are very heinous in nature, like rape or murder. But on the contrary, he has been accused of an offense which is of a lesser gravity, I believe. The counsel believes.
but you just read that he can be punished for an offense which goes up to 10 years. So would you categorize in your submission as a counsel an offense which provides, say, a minimum of 3 and a maximum up to 10 as a serious offense or not so serious offense?
I would bring it under the category of not so serious offense, Your Lordship.
Do you
Permission
have
to
any judicial precedent to say so?
permission to answer this question to your lordship
Yes, yes.
on behalf of her?
Do you have, would you place before us any judicial precedent to say so?
Your lordship, what I would beg to correct her a little bit and answer this from the beginning. Your lordship, whatever the allegations are against the accused husband, whatever heinousness of the offense are, they are all under this draconian national anti-conversion law. And nowhere in this penal provision, the accused is not punishable, or is offense punishable with death or imprisonment for life. So, as for judicial precedents, would like to cite 2 cases where, among others, there are other judgments also, where in Anil Sharma versus State of Himachal Pradesh and Gurcharan Singh versus the state, where the Supreme Court had held that only in exceptional circumstances, which the prosecution and the counsels for the state did not show in the High Court state, because of which we have come before you, that there are no exceptional circumstances that can warrant a person accused with an offense which is not punishable with death or imprisonment for life. So in such cases, the accused should be released on bail pending trial. As an under trial prisoner, his individual rights to dignity and life and prepare for speedy trial should not be violated, and he should be released on bail. That is my answer to your lordship's question, your lordship, and asking the speaker to continue.
Yes, Madam Speaker too, and Counsel, I asked a question to your counsel. I'm asking this question to you. Are you aware of any judgments or any statutes which provide for escalated bail jurisprudence, and whether in the present penal provisions, any escalated bail jurisprudence can be called into play by the prosecution?
Your lordships, the counsels for the petitioner would like to address this question in the rebuttal, if the honorable bench permits.
Are you aware about it? And I'm asking this question to the second counsel.
Your Lordship, I would plead ignorance in this matter at this
No
issue.
At this moment, we are unaware, but by the time of rebuttal, we'll come back to the honorable bench with this.
All right, not an issue. All right, please,
Much obliged,
please.
I think if
please
you
go
can
ahead.
just sum up in 1 minute. Now the time is up already. It means 2 minutes up. So just 1 minute last submissions. Okay.
Please say the prayer, speaker too.
Your Lordship, I would like to proceed with the prayer. In the light of the facts stated, arguments advanced and authorities cited, the counsels for the petitioner or appellant most humbly request this honorable court to adjudge and declare that the present writ petition is allowed, and that the Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act 2021 is ultra vires of the Constitution of Georgetown on account of its vices of arbitrariness and gross violation of various fundamental rights, and that the special leave petition is allowed, and that Rana alias Mana is entitled to be released on bail under any stringent terms and conditions deemed fit by this honorable court. The counsels for the petitioner would also like to request this court to pass any such order which it deems fit in the interest of justice, equity, and good conscience. Much obliged, Your Lordships.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent submission. Well done.
Much obliged, Your Lordships and Your Ladyship.
There's an extension of 9 minutes on your arguments.
Apologies for that, Your Lordship.
Just checking if I'm audible.
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Just humbly requesting your permission to refer to this stellar panel as the bench.
Sure.
The bench is being very humbly submitted by the counsel on behalf of the respondent before this honorable court, that we are not here to make big claims and turn allegations into facts. We are going to simply argue what are proven laws and what are facts of this case that are established to the sense that they can be reasonably inferred to have been true. The first claim that we are making as a rebuttal to what my learned brother and sister from the petitioner's side said is that we do not think that the government is in any way incompetent because of entry 3 of the concurrent list, where you still have public order, and it is very well within the ambit of the powers of the union government to go ahead and make a law about it. Secondly, they tell you that conversion becomes antithetical to the constitutionality, because what happens in terms of you going back to your parental religion is not something that falls within the ambit of this act. And we humbly contend that still exists according to Article 25 of the Constitution, and it does not have to specifically be mentioned under this act. And we do not think that that constitutes ground enough for them to claim that the...
Hold on.
Sir, yes, sir.
What is list? Entry 3 is preventive detention. Entry 3 has nothing to do with...
Your Lordship. Your Lordship, public order, just to like...
detention for reasons of connectivity with security of the state. That is the concurrent list, entry 3.
And Your Lordship, public order is mentioned in that entry itself. Take it out.
You can't read an individual, read the whole thing. It says preventive detention for reasons connected with security of the state and maintenance of public order. You see, the other side was relying on list 1, which is public order, and list 2 is police. You see, what you have to find out is one is the substantive provision and one is the procedural, the police power. You have to, this entry 3 doesn't help you at all. You have to
Your Lordship, list 3, which is... Your Lordship, what we are No, Your Lordship, just to disagree with you a bit on that, what we are essentially contending before this honorable court is that this deals with the penal laws and criminal laws of the country, which is why, and because this act itself is one which is procedural in nature, dealing with criminality and heinous crimes, we think that when you have something as important as public order mentioned under this list, it becomes valid for the union government in the best interest of society and justice to go ahead and bring about something that is as important as the Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act.
You make a distinction between criminal law and public order. You see, in list 3, entry 1 talk of criminal law.
Yes, Your Lordship.
List 2, entry 1, on which your friend was relying, the other side was relying, talks of public order. Is there a distinction between criminal law and public order? So that will be the real reason of constitutional validity so far as the power of the union or the state to legislate. Because this is a union act.
Yes, Your Lordship.
According to you, will be legislated under, now you are not clear whether it is 1, 2, 3 of concurrent list. So because he's saying public orders don't restrict to public, but does it fall under public order? It is a public order or it is a criminal law?
Your Lordship, we think it's a criminal law that is enshrined to maintain public order. So we do not think that they are mutually exhaustive.
The preamble of the act doesn't talk of public order. Where do you get this public order?
Your Lordship, we think that as the parent act of this, which was the Madhya Pradesh Dharma Swatantra Abhiyan of 1968.
You see, read the preamble. Does it talk of public order?
Your Lordship, an act to provide freedom of religion by prohibiting conversion from one religion to another by misrepresentation, allurement, use of threat or force, undue influence, coercion, marriage, or any fraudulent means, and for the matters connected therewith or incident thereof. Your Lordship, we think that when you have something as intricate and Your Lordship,
what has this to do with public order?
Your Lordship, we think, Your Lordship, we humbly contend before you that religion is an extremely intimate and personal matter. If somebody is forcing you to convert your religion, that is, Your Lordship, in our opinion, a matter of public order, especially because this also criminalizes when there is somebody in a position of power in terms of a religious guru, and there is mass, and in cases they have to provide a notice to the district magistrate. We think that something as personal as religion, and if you're forcing someone to convert that, something so intrinsic and intimate to their identity, we think, Your Lordship, we humbly contend before this honorable court that it is actually a matter of public order, Your Lordship, and that is what we're submitting before you.
Don't you think, as my elder brother judge says,
yes, sir,
that if you go to part 3, then the whole act and the intent becomes a colorable piece of legislation?
Your Lordship, if you could just repeat that. I'm sorry, there's a
What
minor
my elder
disconnect.
brother says, that if you
Yes,
go
sir.
and legislate something in the garb of maintaining public order and provide for policing, for which
Yes,
there
Your
is a different schedule, are you not then doing indirectly what you're not supposed to do directly? And therefore, the legislation becomes colorable exercise.
Your Lordship, we do not think something
Why
of that.
shouldn't we strike down the legislation on this
Your
argument?
Lord, Your Lordship, because this legislation only deals with forceful conversion that a third party is causing to the aggrieved. If an aggrieved here reaches out to the court, I don't think an aggrieved would ever reach out to the court if there was willful conversion on their part, which is also, Your Lordship, a direct rebuttal to what my learned brother said in terms of Section 3 of the Act. Section 3 of the Act says that no person shall convert or attempt to convert. Your Lordship, this is the introduction of a third party into the scenario. And if anybody else takes away your choice, your agency and free consent to be able to practice and profess your own religion, we think that becomes a matter of public order. And that is why we think that this legislation stands valid. Yes, sir.
Consider a scenario where
Yes,
a
sir.
person has converted willfully and later on termed it as forceful.
Correct.
Then what happens? Would not this
Your
law
Lordship,
become
if you could just repeat
draconian
that.
in its nature?
Your Lordship, if you could just repeat that.
You consider a situation where a person has converted by will, but later on termed as forceful conversion. So what will happen in such scenario?
Your Lordship, they approach this
Word
court under this
conversion
act.
defined somewhere. Word
Yes,
conversion.
Your Lordship. Section 2C of the Act. Section 2C of the Act states conversion means renouncing one religion and adopting another, but the return of any person already converted to the fold of his parental religion shall not be deemed conversion.
Mr. Counsel, are you
Your
aware
Lordship.
about the Jewish community, which provides for a valid Jewish marriage only if the other person is also a Jew? And in context of personal laws of religion and marriage, do you think there is space for the word marriage in the preamble of the Act?
Your Lordship.
Order to make it constitutional?
Your Lordship,
And
this is not
would it not be better that the word marriage was not in the preamble at all?
Your
And
Lordship, we think.
And also, you know, this is very interesting what my learned judges. You see, read the whole thing. The word force, undue influence, coercion, and fraudulent means. They are all negative. A marriage is not a fraudulent, it is not coercion, it is not force. It is not, you know, marriage is something which is very different. So is it not something, a different inclusion into the preamble? And also section, you know, if you see section 3A, that is what makes it unconstitutional. Why the other side is not? You know, marriage is none of these. So it is a wrong inclusion of marriage, and other things are penal. If you see, by force or threat is penal, undue influence is penal, coercion is penal, and fraudulent means are penal. A marriage is not a penal act. A marriage is something which is a sacrament, or which is something where you live together for a long life. How can that, you know? So therefore, it is a wrong inclusion of a concept, of a positive concept along with a negative concept. So if that is there, then if the marriage has to go, so then the whole act becomes unconstitutional. With the other side is not argued this point, but this is the real crux of the whole issue. That how so how do you defend that? And marriage is not a part of, and where does the marriage goes? They list 1 or list 2 or list 3.
My co-counsel argue which list your Lordship marriage falls under, but I would genuinely like to argue the status of marriage because I think it's extremely individualistic. Your Lordship, I'm not saying this, but the landmark judgment of Sarla Mudgal versus Union of India clearly stated that conversion for the sole purpose of marriage is invalid and unconstitutional. Your Lordship, the facts of the case were that this Hindu person was already married but wanted to remarry, which is why he decided that he would convert to Islam and adopt Islamic practices. Your Lordship, if somebody is willfully converting for the sake of their marriage, then why will they ever approach this honorable court or any court for that matter seeking redressal under this act? We do not think that will happen. However, if somebody is being forced to convert the religion on the pretext of marriage in cases of interfaith marriages, we think that they have
Then they
every
should
right
not
to
marry.
practice their
They should not marry. If they are being forced and they don't want to be forced, they should not marry.
Ma'am, we
Why
think
should
that
it
the law-
attract penal provisions for the person? Just because
Ma'am, we
the
think
person
that
wants to get married to someone of another religion.
Ma'am, we think that a lot of details about marriage are revealed after the marriage has taken place. And if there is that sense of undue influence that a husband
How-
or a
how
wife
are you?
practices,
So in
How are
that
you
case,
presuming that? How are you
Your Lordship-
presuming that as a matter
Your
of
Lordship-
general property?
Your Lordship, because once marriage takes place, the other person becomes falls into a position of
Then it
dominance
becomes
over the
void.
other.
If there's a misrepresentation, it becomes void.
Your ladyship, misrepresentation leading to conversion is exactly what this act is criminalizing, and that is what, your ladyship, we are in favor of. Because after marriage, because your partner assumes a power of prominence in your life and your decisions, because your consent is not free anymore, because this person, your partner in this case,
The provision
unduly-
doesn't
This
talk
act-
of
this
after
argument
marriage.
says-
Once the
It
marriage
talks
is
about-
void, it doesn't exist. So how does
This
it?
act- yes.
Secondly, marriage is a civil contract. How does
Your
criminality comes in marriage? What does criminality do with marriage?
Your Lordship, we don't contend that it's marriage that is becoming criminal in itself. It's just that forcefully converting someone else's religion because on the pretext of marriage is what we are criminalizing. And we think that that is a genuine issue. Because the prominence of this act is that it provides harsh punishments in such cases. And we think that that's extremely important. Because you are assuming a position of dominance in somebody else's life, and you're using that to unduly influence their choice and convert their religion. If it's done willfully, they don't approach the court, they do not seek redressal under this act. But if it's
Is
done
it?
without, yes,
Is it?
your lady.
No, I'm so sorry, means you're misplaced here, means it's the state can act upon the information received by the state. Complainant, a person is not required to complain about.
Your Lordship.
So a state can act itself in such matters. Finding
Your
out
Lordship,
if the complaint is not made, even then the state acts in such matters. Then how do you escape from that? Means the state can misuse its power under the act.
but your Lordship, for the state to start any investigation as given out in this act itself, there has to be a written complainant from the aggrieved person.
Yeah, so I mean, as you said, there are things that are not said and whatever you meant by that. So yeah, love may be lost after marriage and one person may want to go against another person. We already have so many cases under criminal law. You want to
So
bring in
now,
another act.
now the question arises, who is the complainant defined as a complainant defined in the act? Who all can complain?
Which is the exact. Your Lordship, under this act, just check out the section number, section 4. Your Lordship, if I would just be allowed to read section 40 of the act, no police officer shall inquire or investigate except upon a written complaint of a person converted in contravention of section 3 above, or his parents or sibling, or with the leave of the court by any other person who is related by blood, marriage or adoption, guardianship or custodianship as may be applicable.
So therefore,
happens
the person who is marrying, apart from that person, there are so many people who can complain in the
Yes, Your
matter.
Lordship. Yes, Your
So
Lordship.
that is
What if
totally
you have
ultra vires.
consent? What if you
So-
have consent, the siblings don't?
Yes.
Your
Then is your
Lordship,
choice paramount, or is the choice of your sibling paramount?
Your Lordship, we don't think that such a case will stand in court anyway, because the partner in this case is not someone whose religion has been converted unlawfully. So we do
Mr.
not
Constance,
think.
See, the very definition of complainant is
Sir.
very lawful.
Let's look at section 4. Section 4 says written complaint of the person converted. In your case, the conversion has not taken place yet, because your facts in para 3 makes it very clear that there's a pressure of getting converted. Now, in that case, whether this application, the whole case is maintainable at all, it is not maintainable.
Your Lordship, that's exactly what we are contending. We are the counsel for the respondent. We do
Yeah, but
not.
how
think
can
this
you arrest
matter-
him? therefore bail should be granted.
Your lordship,
If the person is not converted yet, that is section 4. Because the complainant can only be a person when the complaint of a person converted in convention. Now the person is not yet converted at all. Para 3, there's only pressure to get converted.
so your lordship, if I just may, I mean, read section 3 again. No person shall convert or attempt to convert, your lordship. There has been attempt to convert, which is why we are humbly like.
The complaint is by section 4. Section 3 is the attempt. Section 4 is only when the conversion takes place.
Your lordship, we plead your ignorance on the said technicality. We plead your ignorance on the said technicality.
You have to read the law. You see, penal law is to be strictly construed. Once it says that a complaint of a person converted, so it can be on the behalf of a person converted. If the person is not converted yet, your complaint is immaterial. The bail has to be immediately granted. Forget about the constitutional validity. But then bail goes, and he has filed it only in 32 because the matter was already pending. So therefore, he came to Supreme Court because then he can write the same bus, same. But here, if you are not covered under 4, you have no case. I don't know if these people are not argue that, but they can still argue.
Your lordship, I completely agree with what you said. But your lordship, we also
you refer
think
to
that
section 41 or 43 when
Sir?
you're replying this. You refer to section 41 or 43. You were reading a section.
so section 3 and 4 of the Freedom of Religion Acts.
3 and 4.
Section
Yes,
4, section 4. Line
We're
2.
talking about, yes, sir. Your lordship just asked me a question about section 4.
Okay.
Complaint can only be on behalf of a person converted. And here the facts are that the person is still, pressure is being built up for conversion.
Your lordship, but it's also,
There is no case under this act at all.
your lordship, what we are humbly contending is that it has to be a contravention of section 3, which is paramount here. And section 3 talks about attempt to convert as well. Your lordship, anyway, forcing someone to convert their religion is extremely unlawful. And then you're using facts like coercion and undue confinement. We think these are huge problems.
Can
And we
you,
think
can
that
you now tell us? Can you now tell us why we should not be granting
Your
bail
Lordship.
to the accused?
Your lordship, if you will,
Proposition.
yes,
Mr.
your lordship.
Counsel, you must read the section whole, section 4. Don't get perturbed. That is what you are trying to test you.
Yes, your
Then
lordship.
it goes further to say converted in conversion of section 3, contravention of section 3, or his parents or siblings or with the leave of the court. So you can always take the leave of the court. Why not reading it a whole? You see, as a young budding lawyer, you must understand, you must read the whole section. Why you get perturbed
Yes,
about one word? I was just
Yes,
trying to
sir.
test you over what are you talking about?
Your lordship, just humbly saying one thing, that we agree this provision may be misused, but we do not think that misuse of a law should be valid enough to declare that law unconstitutional. Because yes, 100 people may misuse the law, your lordship, but even if 2 people validly get redressal in front of the court,
It's not
utilizing
about
the
being
provision.
misused. It's a violation of a
If it is a
person's
misuser,
right
then bail has
to
be granted.
autonomy. I
Your-
mean, somebody else will file a complaint when I myself have chosen to convert. Forget about right to marry, even right to convert will be part of freedom of religion. Isn't that
Yes, your
violation of that?
Your ladyship, if there is
Such
willful-
transgression cannot be allowed in such a scenario when an individual's right to privacy, right to practice is there involved in the matter. then
What
in
does
that case,
Puttaswamy say?
all other people of the society cannot bring an action against such a person.
Penalize it.
This particular definition as contained in section of complainant and the procedure, the offense which has been provided under section 3 are definitely against the violative of various articles 19, 14, 25, all.
Your lordship, if I will just be allowed to argue one thing and why we think this is extremely penal. The bench, if I may be given just a bit of extension to argue why this
Time is
requires
over.
penal.
You have to go to the last counsel because the time you already extended 5 minutes now.
Your lordship, give me, like, your lordship, just humbly beg, reading for 2 minutes, your lordship, to convince you why we
please.
think it's penal. Your
Please,
Lordship,
You
yeah,
must be happy that
complete
you are
your
in India and not in America. Here, there they give you 15 minutes, and if you are in the midst of a sentence, they will close your sentence. Not a word more. You know, you have to be strict. If you can't
Your Lord-
convey, though we have also taken some time, but you have to be very, very precise. Because
Your
in the last,
Lordship,
we are not
Your Lordship, we
All
won't be
right,
given.
can your co-counsel start his argument?
Your Lordship, if I just be given 2 minutes of extension to explain why we
All
think
right, take 1 minute. Take 1
Your
minute.
Lord-
Take
Your
1
Lordship,
minute.
we think that because of the exhaustive facts of this case and the provisions here can be direct, like there can be a parallel drawn to the Georgetown Penal Code, the bench, which is as pari materia to the Indian Penal Code. Section 493 of the Penal Code states that every man who by deceit causes any woman who is not lawfully married to him to believe that she is lawfully married to him and to cohabit and have sexual intercourse with him in that belief shall be punished with an imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine. Your Lordships, your Ladyship, I humbly extend before this honorable court that the exhaustive facts of this case hint that something very similar to this case has happened, which is why I would also like to bring your attention to section 375, which constitutes rape.
But hold on, Mr. Counsel. Your only case is your charge sheet is under 323, 342, and 506.
This is not your case.
How can you go to other sections? There's not
Your
a
Lordship, I'm just
That's
drawing
not
a
even your
parallel.
case, so you can't argue that.
You can't. You just don't go to the entire penal code. You see, your charges are only under 3 and 5 of the 21 Act and section 323, 342, and 506. So it is breach of the penal code. So your other 376 will not lie in this case. Don't try to go into those issues at all.
Your Lordship, I'm simply trying to use this to try and persuade your decision, Your Lordship. I'm not
you cannot.
citing this as
That's
authority.
moving outside the ambit of your brief.
Your Lordship, I'm simply trying to use this as persuasive value. I'm not citing this as an authority, simply trying to
All right,
persuade
all right.
your
Very well.
decision.
Your
minute
second
over now.
person can argue.
We don't
Sure,
seem to be
sure.
persuaded with this simile at all. Now, do you have anything to say in support of the High Court observation in refusal of bail?
Yeah. Your Lordship, my co-counsel. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
With the bench's permission, I would like to begin my arguments.
Please go ahead.
Yes, please.
The council believes, Your Lordship, that the grant of bail in non-bailable offences, as this is in according to Section 3 and Section 5 of the Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act, it depends a lot on the discretion of the court. And to quote Mansfield, which was quoted in Godikanti, it says that discretion, when applied to a court of justice, means sound discretion, guided by law. It must be governed by rule, not by humor. It must not be arbitrary, vague, and fanciful, but legal and regular. Your Lordship, it's important to analyze the situation in which the said petitioner has committed the crime. It's very, very important to realize that in case of non-bailable offences, in the landmark judgment of State versus Captain Jagjit Singh, there were close to 13 guidelines according to which the court decided the grant of bail, which by no means is an exhaustive list. And again, the court relies heavily on the discretion of the learned judges. But these 13 guidelines somehow tell you that this petitioner should not be granted bail whatsoever. We believe, Your Lordship, that the petitioner has not just cheated the victim and not just has forced her to convert her religion, but we need to analyze the status quo. In the existing patriarchal setup of Georgetown, marriage is a very big step for a girl. The breaking of that marriage involves a lot of societal fear.
Hold on, Counsel. You read this paragraph that you're highlighting. It
Yes,
should
Lordship.
then have taken the account of the various considerations such as, now these are the various considerations.
Yes, Your Lordship.
So you have to say that each of these considerations are not met. You know, read them carefully. Each one of them. You say there are 5 of them. So in
Yes,
your
Lordship.
case, when you're opposing it, you have to show that this offense is not serious, that the character of the evidence, circumstances of because just read them and just try to, just confine yourself to these arguments and say why bail should be refused in each one of them.
Yes, Your Lordship.
And that will be better.
To the very first condition guideline, that is the seriousness of the offense. That is what I was elaborating on. I believe that the offense should not be looked into isolation with the condition of the victim. We believe that the victim mental suffering has been multiplied tenfold because of the harassment that she has gone through. She was wrongfully confined. She was not allowed to talk to her parents. And apart from all of that, she was forced to change her religion. Now, your lordship, the seriousness of the offense also depends on the very fact that religion is a very intrinsic part of one's upbringing. It cannot develop overnight. Religion is something that one identifies with, that develops through a gradual period of time, or for that matter, for the entirety of life. And we believe that the mental trauma that the victim had to face here, because she was married on the false pretext. She believed that her husband belonged to a different community. And after that false pretext was broken, she was then forced to change her religion. We believe that this increases the seriousness of the offense to a larger extent, and that the respondent should not be given bail in this case.
Mr. Counsel, just hang on a minute there.
Yes, Your Lord.
Are you saying that this aspect of the matter stands decided already, or this aspect of the matter, that whether the lady was cheated and was given not a proper representation or a material fact was concealed, would be an issue of trial?
Your Lordship, we believe that the High Court, when rejecting the bail, had analyzed these certain conditions. As of now, the council does not have the charge sheet or the High Court judgment at our perusal, so we cannot verify that.
Can you please go to paragraph 7 of the moot problem and read us the third line? When Mr. Rana files his bail application before the High Court rejects the bail application, holding that there are no reasonable grounds for believing that he's not guilty of the offense he has been charged with. I want to ask you a question. Was the High Court well within his rights? Was the High Court well within its rights to return this finding?
Your Lordship, we do believe that the prima facie case does indicate that, and the grant of the bail application, it's already been cited in different judgments that the extra evaluation of evidence is not justified, because sometimes the victim might take it that the extra examination of the evidence is something that is going against the victim or the petitioner who's asking for the bail.
Hold on, Mr. Counsel. Do you say that prima facie assessment of a case is equivalent to not guilty of the offense? Are you getting what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, Your Lordship, we are just inferring the judgment of the High Court. We are not anyway standing with it. We are just saying that the High Court was well within its right and had a clear view of what the judgment that they were giving.
Please,
in the best
It was very much within its right, but what were the reasons that High Court could pass such an order?
We believe, Your Lordship, the reasons, the one reason that is mentioned in the moot problem is basically that there are no reasonable grounds for believing that he is not guilty, and the other reasons are something that we are going ahead with. In the case of a non-bailable offences, when bail cannot be granted, the certain conditions that the High Court might have gone through are laid here in the landmark judgment of Captain Jagjit Singh, and we are just going by guidelines.
What you should have done, you should have researched whether prima facie consideration could have evolved in the assumption of guilt by the High Court, whether it is the right thing by the High Court to do or not. So that was a question of law on which you had to address, which you have not been prepared.
Counsel, are you aware, and can you assist us whether the statute and penal provisions here, which are 323, 342, 506, and 3 and 5 of Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act 2021, would provide for a bail refusal on escalated bail jurisprudence, a higher pedestal than normal grant of bail, more predicament?
Your Lordship, the three provisions under GPC are bailable.
Yes.
But the two provisions under the Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act are non-bailable. We believe, and when this is non-bailable, we believe the general rule of bail is the rule and jail is the exception, is not as mandatory, because it then depends on the discretion of the court. We believe that even in the controversial UAPA law, it's also said that jail is the rule and bail is the exception.
But why is bail refused generally under UAPA?
Your Lordship, because there is a Prevention Act.
Are
So
you aware
just-
about are you aware about provisions like 37 NDPS Act, 43D subclause 5 of UAPA Act?
Your Lordship,
Are you aware about Section 45, twin conditions in the Money Laundering Act, where escalated bail jurisprudence is provided by the legislature, which says that in addition to the formula which was enunciated in Jagjit Singh's case, the additional requirements will also be met. Only then the bail will be granted.
Your
What
Lordship,
we observe is that your indictment doesn't provide for escalated bail jurisprudence at all. So why should
Your
we be
Lordship,
granting the bail?
Your Lordship, that is what we are contending. We are saying that said persons will not be granted bail. We are not acquainted with the escalated bail jurisprudence that you to your. But regarding the NDPS Act in the Nooragha versus State of Punjab, Justice Sinha had opined that the first important hint in this regard is the statement that merely placing the burden of the proof on the accused would not render a provision doing so unconstitutional or otherwise. So we believe that even if the burden of proof is on the accused, we believe that even then the act stands, and the fact that he should not be granted bail because he does not meet these criteria as has been mentioned in the Captain Jagjit Singh case as well. If your Lordship humbly allow, I would like to stress on a couple of more guidelines in the Captain Jagjit Singh order, and would like to quote a judgment which is which is very similar in this regard, that it was based on the Uttar Pradesh Freedom of Religion Ordinance in a recent case of Javed Ansari. While rejecting bail, Justice Shekhar Kumar Yadav said, "There is no place for religious fanaticism and there is no place for greed and fear. If someone converts religion by doing so, then it is not acceptable in any religion, and the Indian Constitution also does not allow it." He further went on to say, "It is to be remembered that Article 25, subsection 1 guarantees freedom of conscience to every citizen, not only to followers of only one particular religion. And it shows that there is no fundamental right to forcibly convert any other person to anyone's religion, because if any person will act apart from trying to spread or propagate the doctrine of his religion, which is common to all citizens of the country, this will indeed affect the guaranteed freedom of conscience." We believe, Your Lordship, that is what the petitioner here also has been trying to do. The fact that it's also been said a lot of times that the severity of the punishment runs proportional to the fact that the petitioner is likely to flee if released on bail, or he's likely to abscond if released on bail. It's also something which is very, very important. Since the punishment is very harsh, the chances that when released on bail, the petitioner might flee. And also another important aspect would be the fact that the danger of witnesses being tampered with. Well, Lordship, it's also important to realize that in the mood problem, it's been clearly stated that the marriage took place within the presence of close friends and family, and that they were aware of the relationship. It can be reasonably inferred, because it's basically the human tendency to protect oneself at all costs. Mr. Rana, alias Mana, would go ahead and influence such friends and family. They might be at a risk of mental or physical coercion from the said person. We also believe that the geographical proximity of the petitioner can cause threat to the safety of the victim, even if that is curtailed, even if they are not proximate, even if they are not geographically close. We believe that the private nature of the relationship that the petitioner and the victim shared, it does provide the petitioner immense personal details of the victim, which he may then misuse to skew the investigation. He may then misuse to skew the witnesses or influence them. The
Mr. Counsel, till the time charge sheet has been filed,
Yes,
do you have any complaint or any incident that any kind of effort has been made to influence any witness?
Your Worship, we do not have any. The moot province is silent on that, but the fact that it's been stated that the victim was confined.
Then wouldn't your argument that potentially a witness can be influenced be only speculative?
Your Lordship, it's been seen in the complaint that the petitioner had already confined the victim So we believe that the petitioner does have the intent to do so again. We believe now, since the fact that if he might not try to influence them, he might go to jail for a harsher punishment, because the Georgetown Freedom of Religion Act warrants a harsher punishment that may extend up to 10 years. So he might go ahead and make sure everything in his power to influence this, the nature of the investigation.
Mr. Counsel, please tell us, from Jagjit Singh's case or otherwise in your understanding, the gravity, criteria, severity of the punishment and seriousness of the offense, whether you would delineate this to the term of the imprisonment or to the means, manner, or mechanism of committing the offense.
Your Lordship, it's very important. We cannot, I believe it's very difficult to mutually exclude both of them. The fact that the manner in which the crime was committed, the fact that the severity of the crime cannot be just adjudged by the fact that it has a 10-year punishment. We believe the facts of the case are descriptive enough to give you an idea of what the victim went through throughout the entire period. And we believe that is something that must be taken into consideration as well.
If the offense has a minimum 3, extendable up to 7, and upon trial, say the judge gives only 3, why should the man be in custody?
Your Lordship,
Are you aware about the judgment passed by the Supreme Court in P. Chidambaram's case? A 3-judges bench led by Honorable Madam Justice Bhanumati.
Your Lordship, the counsel would like to
where she said that where an offense is max punishable up to 7 years, doesn't tantamount to be a serious offense at all.
And no further investigation has to take place now. So why should he be in jail at all? The investigation already over. Charge sheet is already there.
Your Lordship, the fact that when released on bail, he might affect the aggrievant, the victim, and the family members. He can abscond as well.
On that argument, Mr. Counsel, then no court would grant bail to anybody. And would that not militate against the fundamental presumption of innocence till proven guilty?
Your Lordship, this is what we believe that this act deals with, that when it says that the burden of proof is on the accused. So we believe that the act itself says that in section.
I'm saying what I'm saying, the burden of proof is on the accused.
Yes.
Yes,
Your
Lordship.
Lord.
Yes, it
Section
does.
12. Section 12
right.
of the said
There
act.
is a presumption of guilt in the act, not a presumption of innocence. So therefore, the burden of proof. But then the nature of proof has to be probability based.
Yes,
The
Lord.
counsel, the burden of proof will be rebutted and called into play by an accused during the course of cross-examination or during the course of a bail plea argument. How is an accused supposed to rebut burden at the time of bail plea when the complainant is not amenable for a cross-examination at all? And wouldn't therefore burden of proof be relegated to the trial rather than the bail aspect and bail stage?
Your Lordship, we believe that
Also
the High Court.
Conversion already been effected. Here the conversion not been effected at all. It is under process. Because it is not, you see, read 12. 12 says it's been effected.
Your Lordship, but
Conversion has not taken place yet.
And that is heinous enough attempt to do so. And Section 4 does say that person converted, but it also has that in contravention of Section 3 as well. So even if the person is attempting to convert anyone, this act does cover that as well. The council believes.
So would you say that an act of attempt is as grievous as the main act itself, which has already been culminated?
Your Lordship, we believe that
does the penal code provide same sentences for an attempt as well as actual commission of the offense?
No, Your Lordship, we don't believe that these crimes are equal or in any way warrant the same punishment, but we just believe that the facts of the said case need that amount of punishment. We believe that it was a very brave move or a very opportune move by the parents of the victim
Just
here.
read section 5 and tell us which part of the provision would get impacted in this case and why.
If your leadership could please pardon, we couldn't get that.
Which part of what my learned sister Judge Saab says, please go back to section 4, section 5, and then provide which is the impugning provision that you are calling into play to persuade us not to grant bail.
Your Lordship.
All right. It starts with the word whoever contravenes the provision of section 3.
Section 3 shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 1 year, but which may extend to 5 years, and shall also be liable to fine, which shall not be less than 25,000. Provided further, whoever contravenes the provisions of section 3 in respect of a minor, a woman, or
minor is not to play here. Read the next one. Skip it. It's not your case. It is a minor.
It says, provided further that whosoever intends to marry a person of any religion other than the religion professed by him, and conceals his religion in such a manner that the other person whom he intends to marry believes that his religion is truly the one professed by him, shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which shall not be less than 3 years, but which may extend to 10 years, and shall also be liable to fine, which shall not be less than rupees 50,000.
Right. That is the impugning provision.
Yes, Your Lordship, and we believe that in this case, the said petitioner should be the grant of bail should be rejected here as well, because section 3 already says it's a non-bailable offense according to section 5.
Please tell us, the High Court has returned a finding that there are no reasonable grounds to believe that the accused is not guilty. So therefore, has the High Court not prejudged the whole case? It is yet to be proved. The accused has a defense that his spouse or beloved already knew that I belong to a different religion, and that's what he's going to prove during the course of the trial. When the High Court has returned a finding that it seems to me, or it seems to us, that there is nothing on record to presume or a reasonable belief that he's not guilty, has the High Court not prejudged the whole case? Is it as it can be pronounced? Can we today, at the stage of filing of the charge sheet, pronounce the accused as guilty without asking the complainant to step into the witness box and testify? Are you able to do that today?
I'm sorry, Your Lordship, the counsel would like to plead its ignorance on the fact.
Why ignorance? Why ignorance? You have to read your case. If the charge sheet has been filed, filing of the charge sheet is not equal to pronouncing somebody guilty. Somebody will be guilty only when the witnesses or the complainant or the prosecution gets its witnesses to testify. Then those witnesses are to be cross-examined. The guilty verdict will only come at the end of the trial, not right now. So how was the High Court right in returning that finding?
Your Lordship, we believe, because there is the moot problem is silent on the fact that whether the High Court did have the cross-examination or not. The
cross-examination, Mr. Counsel, is yet to begin. Only the charge sheet has been filed. That's the case of the girl. She's lodged an FIR. Investigation has been completed. Charge sheet has been filed. Nobody has testified as of now.
And we believe, Your Lordship, even since the very fact that nobody has testified, and if the said person is released on bail, he might easily influence the witnesses. If we believe the fact that he should be, at least for that moment, as till the cross-examination begins, he must not be granted bail, because the fact that he not only has the power to influence such people, but he also has due to the nature of their relationship, he has certain personal details of the victim as well, which he might use to skew.
All
By
right, you can
refusing-
close. I'm so sorry. Can we ask him to close the argument now? Because then the rebuttal may start. I have a meeting scheduled after this immediately.
Yes, yes, please. I think that's enough argued.
Yeah.
The council would humbly like to pray.
We know the prayer. Thank you.
Permission for rebuttal, your lordships and your ladyship. Just a
1
small
minute
difference.
rebuttal. That's all.
Exactly. I was
1
just
minute. 30 seconds on
Exactly.
constitutionality. 30 seconds on bail. I have given you enough hints.
why I should do voluntary religious conversion as long as I do it for not doing any offense should not be an arbitrary headache of the state, your lordship. And this is where Article 25 gets violated, your lordship. And since all the vital provisions of this act violate the constitutional rights of the citizens of Georgetown, including the golden right, according to the doctrine of severability, since these vital provisions cannot be separated from the act, the whole act should be declared ultra vires of the Constitution of Georgetown. And your lordship, just to wrap it up, I would just give an analogy. Forcible conversions are any day bad. So if you may compare the state of Georgetown to a patient suffering from the disease of forcible conversion, the state of Georgetown has brought in an illegal medicine that has so many side effects that after the application of the medicine, the patient is left in a vegetative state because the arbitrariness of the state will basically violate the fundamental rights of the patient left and right at the arbitrariness of the state. So this is why this act should be scrapped and the accused should be released on bail without further prejudice to his individual liberty, dignity, so that he may prepare freely for his upcoming trial under any terms and conditions as this honorable bench deems fit. Much obliged, your lordships and your ladyship.
Your lordship, could we humbly request for a 1 minute rebuttal if you please grant that to us?
No, I
No,
don't think
sir.
that's.
It's at the discretion of the bench, so just humbly asking for your permission. Just if
No,
1 minute we are
there's
allowed.
no rebuttal to a rebuttal. Let's close it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Much obliged, your lordship.
With the leave of your lordships, can we move them to a private room? Then they can
We have
discuss
to.
among themselves and give us
Yes,
a winner
yes.
and the best advocate.
Yes, yes, please do that.
Right.
Much obliged, your lordships.
And we'll
Thank you.
send at least I'll send a written feedback for all of you. As
That would be
paucity
great.
of time, we are not doing it.
Yes. Judges may also share verbal feedback after discussing privately as to who the winner is, and then can do that. So Arja, if you may just move your lordships and ladyships to a private.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
না না আমি থাকবো না তারপরে যাবো মানে ডাকলে তারপর যাবো
Have they been moved?
Yes, yes, they have been.
আচ্ছা
I
how
think
will they tell us
Pradeep
the
sir is still
results?
here. Pradeep sir is still here. Pradeep sir is still here.
Pradeep sir is here.
no, Pradeep sir moved.
Okay.
You guys can.
Right. So how will they understand when to
Yeah, so shall
Will
any
they
one
come
of
back
us
on
go
that?
to that room? Like,
No,
will
I
that
don't
be
think so.
alright?
It's a
No.
Cool.
I hope the finalists had a great time, and so did everybody.
We had a great time just hearing them, hearing all of you argue.
It was wonderful.
Well done, well done.
Arja.
Well done, TC14, TC02.
So there's a high chance that the judges may announce the results live. So let's see. It's on them.
Yeah, kindly don't leave the meeting after if the judges announce result right now. Stay here, please.
Yeah, please stay on. Huh? No one please leave the meeting.
For the non-participants, it's your wish. If you want to stay back, please stay back. If you
Yeah,
want. But
non-participants
we
stay
would
back.
request you to stay back for the valedictory ceremony. So that would be great.
Valedictory ceremony will commence just after this. So please stay back.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Have your lordships in leadership decided on the verdict?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
Great. So I think we can get to the verdict and the feedback for the teams. Not any further delay.
Can you check if Mr. Gupta is here?
Yeah, he has joined back. So
Okay.
I think let him declare the verdict.
Yes.
Aruneshwar sir, the
Declaration is in the open court and it is only to the people. It is an
open court.
Open code. Judgment.
code,
Judgment has to be read. The operative
So far
portion
as
has to
the
be read.
best team is concerned, we declare the respondent team code 02 as the winner. And so far as the best speaker is concerned, we declare the petitioner team code TC is 14, speaker 1. Advait Arnab Mitra is the best speaker.
Sir, I'm for the respondent. I'm very sorry. I'm not on team code 14, sir. I'm on team code 2. Team code 14's first speaker would be Satyaki Dev, sir. I was responding,
It's a
sir.
wrong name.
Speaker 1, who is speaker 1?
Your Lordship, I would gladly accept your award if you are giving it to me, but I don't think it is.
Let me correct it again.
Advocacy in the other branch.
Let me correct it again.
He is ready for the award of the other person.
Team TC code 14. Speaker 1, who is the speaker 1?
Yes, your Lordship.
And that's what your name.
Yes, this boy, yes.
Yes, your Lordship.
What is your name?
Satyaki Dev.
Okay. So the SMS I got, because your names are not displayed here, and what name I got on my mobile was the other way around. So you are the winner so far the best speaker is concerned.
Much obliged, your Lordship. And
team,
much obliged.
And the respondent team 2 is the best team.
Much obliged, your Lordship. We are very glad our names reached your mobile phone today. It's the greatest honor we've received as law students. Thank you so much, sir. It was an honor arguing in front of you.
Okay, Satyaki Dev, best of luck. And
thank you, Lordship. Much obliged. Thank you.
Team 2, best of luck. And do some more research and be more precise. That is, I think you have to learn from this because what issues were raised by Tanvirji and Vivek, you were not able to pick them up in your, they were really outstanding issues. And I think it needs more thinking on the legs, which you need to really start appreciating or getting into it. You need to have, don't get bogged about the voluminous, because there are so many issues which are there. But what issue really is that you have to precisely come to the, you just make 4, 5, 6 points. Don't go around. So that's the art, and that is something you must learn from Mr. Tanveer Ahmed Mir, who has been a very outstanding lawyer on the criminal side.
So those birds you can.
And that is why the questions which comes from him are like, absolutely like the Brahmastra. So you have to, you have to be very, very, cautious about what he's talking about. And this is exactly how you learn the process. The learning process is as you see what is going in their brain, because that is 40 years ahead, 30 years ahead in time. And so thank you, Vivek, Sanchita ji, and Pradeep, and Tanveer ji.
Yes,
and
I'll just say a few words. All of you have done very well. And let me tell you, the winners, and there is no loser amongst the lawyers ever in your life. Even if you lose a case, you always win it because you've been a participant. And the universities are next generation lawyers. So these interaction must continue. There are only 2 ways that you make good lawyers, like senior lawyers like Mr. Rai, Mr. Gupta. These are legendary lawyers. And that's by shared hard work, dedication to your work, to your core selves, core beliefs. When you do your research and you argue for bail, you must always see whether the bail is being asked under normal law or escalated law. You'll see escalated law in NDPS. You'll see escalated law under UAPA. There, bail is more stringent. So when you oppose a bail or you argue for a grant of bail, you should know your provisions and then argue it. You should also understand what is meant by burden of proof. Ultimately, That'll make you strong lawyers. And before I go, I'll tell you, if you want to be the best of the litigators, finally, like Mr. Gupta at the Supreme Court level, you have to be good trial lawyers to start with, and then go to the bigger courts. Then you make yourself into legendary legal luminaries. So I'm sure that all of you would have wonderfully enjoyed this interaction, and just keep it up.
Vivek, Pradeep, anything to add?
Yes, yes. It's really a pleasure having you all and listening to you all. It was really a pleasure. You must note one thing, that law is a jealous mistress. You have to focus on your studies. You have to focus on your, actually, the quality of education. At the same time, you have to listen your seniors. Really, you people are doing a good job. Sometimes, somewhere, if you lack, don't worry for that. It can be rectified. It will improve. And you all are doing really great. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
But
I just
let me add one line here, Pradeep, that she's a jealous mistress, but I must have a wife first. But there is a mistress.
Yes, yes, yes. You are on the
only come after you are married. Most of them are
different.
not married yet, so there will be no mistress yet. So they don't know.
The
They are all
education
girlfriends.
itself, sir. Education itself. My purpose of saying this was that if you are practicing law, then if you focus on something, that will be good for you all. Just focus on that. Hard work has no other substitute. You have to do hard work. And what rightly Tanvirji and Nishwar sir has said, that you all have to actually practice your law. Practicing law means every day, touch day-to-day affairs has to be brought to your notice. Developments, framing of law, judgments. At the same time, if new ideas evolves, that also you have to take into consideration. You must remember that in the days of Nazis there in Germany, whatever Hitler did, that was legal in those days. And whatever our freedom fighters were doing in India, that was illegal. So you have to consider the mistake, have to prepare yourself in that direction. You all are really good, and whatever Arneshwar sir says, we accept it humbly because he is our senior, and Tanvir bhai is actually, you are really great. We have to go with few lessons along with the students. Thank you,
My
sir.
only
Thank
addition
you,
is
everyone.
don't treat law as your mistress. Treat it as your girlfriend or your boyfriend. then you have a better time.
Sanjita will put.
You have to spend a lot of money on the
more
mistress.
light,
See, you have to spend a lot of money on the mistress, which you don't have to.
sir. Sanjita will put more light to it.
Jealous mistress has certain traits that girlfriend won't have. It's extreme, extreme
Actually,
quality
it's a
of.
old saying. Actually, it's an old saying. What Justice Venkat Chalaya used to say, and ultimately I did a research that from where it evolved. So around 1540, someone argued this, and they taught in a class that was not about law completely. They were just teaching jurisprudence. That was this monarchy in the UK, and those days it was taught, and that's how it evolved. So it's just a saying. Don't take it.
Hold on. This was a speech by Justice Holmes on 14th of March 1894. It was a post-dinner speech.
Yes, sir. I have read
He
that.
called it as the law, my mistress, the law. Because my biography, which I am writing, is Death of My Mistress.
I will send you, sir. I will send you the quotes.
According to me, the law is dead, and that is something which Mir will support me. So that is the biography which I am writing, and this started because I read this. I read the Life and Faith of
I will
Holmes.
send you the brief, sir. I will send you the quotes which I gathered from the Oxford Library. I will send it to you, sir. Just keep it with you, sir. It will be good. And if you can take few paragraphs from
According to me,
I will forward it to you.
My mistress is dead already.
No, sir. We will not allow your mistress to be dead.
That's an interesting discussion, and I would just like to add that both the teams have really did commendable job, wonderful research. When I have gone through your material, these were very nicely prepared material. The only thing that I would like to add in the entire process that you could have done, little more crystallization of the thought process. And that crystallization will evolve only when you will read judgments of the Supreme Court every day. at this stage when you are in, all the law students should undertake this, that every day they should read at least 3 to 4 judgments or passed by Supreme Court pertaining to different and diverse subjects, so that you would know that how the issues have to be evolved, how the findings have to be read, and you would be much more precise and clear in your understanding and in your expression. So that will really help you. So just this is one advice which I would like to say. And really remarkably, I enjoyed, and all my co-brothers have, and Ms. Sanchita has really enjoyed the expressions, the extempore that you have been, because we have been asking a lot of questions, which is very much unlike us, but at the same time is when we started asking, so there were so many questions. So nonetheless, you did well. All the very best for your future endeavors, and enjoy your time. Best of it.
Right. My feedback, just one. I think Mr. Gupta, you're on mute. Okay. Just one. Show, not tell. So what many times you were doing is you were going on repeating the same thing because you knew it. If you would have really got it, if you would have really got your client's case, then even when you are asked impromptu questions, you will be able to answer. That's one. The second way of doing it is thinking of the counter arguments beforehand and then countering it and preparing your counter arguments along with preparing your arguments. That's kind of quite basic preparation that you need to do before you start addressing. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, so with these words, I think we must close the session.
All right.
And thank you, everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Your Lordship, your Lordship, if
Lordship.
you have just 2 minutes of time, then our faculty member, Dr. Shuhini Banerjee, would like to address the bench, Your Lordship. If you just could be.
Yes, sure, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Lordship.
Thank you.
Ma'am, you're
You
on
have to
mute, ma'am.
unmute, ma'am. Sohini, ma'am. Unmute first. Yes.
Good afternoon to this eminent panel of judges. It's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much, respected judges, for this hermeneutic afternoon. And it was definitely in the spirit of Essentio Mentium, that is a meeting of good minds. I'm really grateful to the Moot Court Committee for inviting such a stellar panel of judges as you. And a heartiest note of thanks to respected Mr. Pradeep Rai, Vice President, Supreme Court Bar Association and Senior Advocate, Honorable Supreme Court of India. A warm note of thanks to esteemed Mr. Tanveer Ahmed Sir, Senior Advocate, Honorable Supreme Court of India and founder at Chambers of Tanveer Ahmed Mir. Thanks to respected Mr. Aruneshwar Gupta, Senior Advocate, Honorable Supreme Court of India and former Advocate General for the state of Rajasthan. And a respectful thanks to Mr. Vivek Narayan Sharma, Advocate on Record, Honorable Supreme Court of India and Senior Counsel, Union of India, Government of UP, Member IT Committee and the Bar Council of Delhi as well. And respectful thanks to Miss Sanchita Ain as well. It's Honorable Advocate on Record, Supreme Court of India. It's been a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much. And I would just like to say a few lines of the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley as a conclusion. It is dedicated to the esteemed panel of judges who are esteemed trustees of the Indian Constitution. The poem goes like this. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this spirit of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Thank you, sirs. Thank you, ma'am, for your unconquerable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that was a beautiful poem, Sohini. And I think you must read another poem by Frank Sinatra. I did it my way. Whether you like it or you don't like it, I did my way. So I always tell everybody you must read two things. One is a essay by Emerson on self-reliance, who says that everybody's got a field to till, and everybody's slotted in a manner, and so you have to find your own gift and move on that way. So don't try to be enamored about anybody. Find your own gift and then do it your way. So follow Frank Sinatra and follow Emerson. That's, I think, the last word. Thank you very much and best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, obliged.
Thank you, dear. Thank you.
Thank you, panel.